I would love to hear what Legal Eagle has to say about this one.
You see, we all love a good ghost story, but this one is particularly close to my heart because the man in this story was my great 8 times over uncle. And he had the prodigious burden of summoning a dead man to testify in a court of law.
This ghost story was personally witnessed and accounted for by many historical figures, not least of whom Bishop Jeremy Taylor, renowned cleric in the Church of England.
So make sure you like this video right now, unless you want me to pull a James Haddock and haunt you for a month straight. Let's get into it.
In early 1657, on the outskirts of Belfast, James Haddock, whom may be the most determined man to have ever lived on a farm at Malone with his wife Eleanor and their young son, John. James, preparing for the future, wanted to add his son John to the lease so he could take over the farm when he turned 21. He paid the first sum of money to renew the lease, but unfortunately he died before he was able to pay the final installment. The agreement that added his son to the lease wasn't finalized before he died, but shortly thereafter, Eleanor remarried, and she happened to marry a certain Jacob Davis, who was the executor of James Haddock's will. Mr. Davis was willing and able to pay the final installment that James never got to before his untimely death, and he took care of Eleanor and John. And so Eleanor just let him take care of the matter gratefully. Happily, the two of them had another son, but what Eleanor may or may not have been privy to at the time was that Davis had inserted the name of his own son into the new lease agreement, which ultimately disinherited James Haddock's son, John, from the farm. One night, about 5 years after James Haddock had passed away, a certain proper, lusty, and stout fellow, Francis Taverner, who happens to be my great uncle, he was riding home from Hillsborough. I don't think I've ever been accused of being proper, lusty, and stout. Anyway, his horse, though of good mettle, suddenly started becoming agitated as they rode through the night. It was nervous about something. Taverner happened to be nearing Drum Bridge, near the village of Drumbeg, and before they approached it, a bridge he had crossed many times before, his horse stopped altogether and refused to move across it. Somewhat worried, because this has never happened before, Taverner dismounted and he tried to walk his horse across, but his horse wasn't having it. While Taverner wrestled with his horse, 2 other horsemen suddenly appeared and raced by. Though they happened upon him with such speed, Taverner recalled to his amazement that he heard no treading of their feet as they galloped by. Then suddenly a third one appeared out of the darkness, dismounted quickly, and in a white coat approached Taverner. Taverner's eyes widened in fear and shock as his eyes locked onto the man in curious wonder. It couldn't be. The man looked like his friend, James Haddock, but James had died 5 years earlier. "In the name of God, who are you?" Taverner shouted, his breath catching in the chill of the night air. "I am James Haddock," the man replied, "and you may call me to mind by this token, that about 5 years ago, I and 2 other friends were at your father's house, and you, by your father's appointment, brought us some nuts, and therefore be not afraid." Taverner remembered the event, and thinking it truly might be the apparition of his dearly departed friend, replied, "Why have you appeared to me rather than someone else?" Haddock said, "Because you, Taverner, are a man of more resolution than others, and if you would ride this way with us, I will acquaint you with the business to attend to." And Taverner, with a gleam in his eye, in the spirit of adventure, looked the ghost, James Haddock, in his eye, and he ran away as fast as he could. Really, he didn't want anything to do with this phantom who claimed to be his friend. It didn't matter what token he gave him, and he wanted to be rid of the matter as soon as possible. So mid-conversation, Taverner jumped on his horse, he kicked his horse in the side, and the horse finally moved. It bolted, and they fled straight through the quadrivial, across the bridge as fast as his horse would gallop, and right behind him, nipping at his horse's hooves, there arose a great wind carrying the shrill sound of hideous screeches and other terrible noises. What were those noises exactly? The tale doesn't say, but I think a greater question is, what on earth is a quadrivial?
Quadrivial.
Ha! I said it right the first time. It's where 4 roads meet. Or shouldn't that be where 2 roads meet? Either way, I'm going to bring this one back.
Yeah, to get to the Mart of Protus, we're going to have to take a left at this upcoming quadrivial.
A left at the quadrivial?
Left at the quadrivial.
Well, the maps of Apple irrevocably decree that we need to go straight through that upcoming quadrivial
To get to the Mart of Protus,
2 minutes flightier.
Francis Taverner, needless to say, was freaked out, and he galloped home until he heard the cocks crow, to his great relief. He slowed and alighted off of his horse and fell to his knees in earnest prayer for God's protection. Taverner got home safely, but shaken, and he didn't know what to think. Was he just imagining James Haddock? Was he hallucinating from fatigue? No matter, he tried to put it out of his mind and get some sleep. His wife noticed his immediate concern, but Taverner spoke nothing of it. The next evening wouldn't go as planned. Haddock fairly intrusively appeared to Taverner in his own home. Without giving Taverner a moment to respond, Haddock got right to that business he spoke of on the bridge and asked Taverner to do something quite uncomfortable. Taverner turned white and started shaking uncontrollably, and wide-eyed couldn't believe what he was seeing. Nonetheless, Haddock was right in front of him, and he asked him to go to Eleanor, Haddock's wife in life, and ask her if her maiden name wasn't Eleanor Welsh, and if it were, to tell her that it was James Haddock's will, her former husband's will, that their son should be righted in the will. Taverner, in shock, listened to what the apparition had to say in his very home before Haddock vanished just as quickly as he had appeared. Taverner got little sleep that night, if any, thinking about what this ghost wanted him to do. If he were to entertain this phantom, even in the slightest, what was he to say to his neighbor, Eleanor Welsh, now Eleanor Davis? "Excuse me, your dead husband appeared to me and wants you to keep your son's name on the lease, so yeah, yep, there you have it." He'd be laughed out of town and considered delusional, or even worse, deranged or possessed. The morning came, and Taverner thought to go to Eleanor's house, which was relatively close by, to relay the message, but he didn't. And to his horror, Haddock appeared to him again as he sat by his fire that night for a report. "Have you delivered the message?" Haddock earnestly asked. Taverner, again turning white and shaking, admitted that he hadn't. Haddock disappeared, clearly disappointed, but not before admonishing him to perform his duty. The next morning came, and again Taverner stubbornly didn't do it, and Haddock appeared again in what the account claims as a more terrible form. "Have you delivered the message?" "No," Taverner cried, and Taverner continued to put it off, but every night for a month, Haddock appeared to Taverner, appearing more and more terrible and hideous every time. You might be wondering, what did Taverner's wife think about all of these episodes? Well, she reported that she never saw the apparition of James Haddock, but she soon learned when Taverner was seeing him. She could visibly see that Taverner's countenance would change instantly. He'd turn white, and his whole body would start trembling terribly, near convulsing. And this begs the question, was Taverner not really seeing a ghost, but was he merely having seizures? Finally, after about a month of this paranormal trauma, Taverner girded up his loins and went to his neighbor Eleanor. He confronted her and asked, "Is your maiden name Eleanor Welsh?" "If it was," he said, "I have a message for you." She replied quizzically, "Yes, but there is another Eleanor Welsh in the area nearby." Taverner, up to this point, had been determined to deliver the message so he could be rid of this phantom. But when he heard that there was another Eleanor Welsh nearby, doubt flooded his mind that he was talking to the right one, and he didn't know what to do. He promptly, awkwardly left the conversation, returning home without delivering the message. He went home nervously and tried to sleep, and to his surprise, he was actually able to get to sleep. Usually Haddock appeared to him just before he went to bed, and that didn't happen this night. So he thought maybe it was over. Maybe he had done enough. But fortunately, Tavern's reprieve didn't last very long at all. He got to sleep, but he was awakened in the middle of the night by a pressure on his chest. He woke, and it was Haddock in a white coat, looming heavily over him. "Have you delivered your message?" he asked calmly. Taverner replied, "I have met with Eleanor Wells." And before he could finish his sentence, Haddock's demeanor changed. He looked pleasant for once and said, "Be not afraid." Then he vanished in a flash of white light. And he didn't appear the next night, or the one after that, or the one after that. And Taverner began to think that he had done enough, and his hope was that Haddock wouldn't visit him again. However, through whatever means ghosts have at their disposal, he apparently discovered that Taverner hadn't delivered his message to Eleanor Welsh. Neither did he actually admit that he did, but it was just a little bit of a miscommunication between ethereal realms, shall we say? Easy enough mistake. And poof! One night, taking Taverner by surprise again after he thought it was over, Haddock appeared again, and he was pissed. I imagine Taverner taking a sip of his evening tea and Haddock just appearing there right in front of him as he sipped, then spewing it all over the kitchen. Haddock was no longer playing around. He got right in Taverner's face and threatened to tear him to pieces if he didn't deliver the message to Eleanor. This frightened Taverner so much that he left his home and went straight to Eleanor's house? No. He ran away and spent the night at a certain Pierce's house near Lord Chichester's in Belfast. This Pierce had heard of Haddock's ghost through the grapevine and wanted to see for himself the apparition appear. And about midnight, as they sat by the fire, Taverner's countenance fell, and he started to uncontrollably tremble. Taverner saw Haddock sitting in a chair across a dark room. Pierce looked, but he saw no one, and he would later recall that he never saw James Haddock, but whenever he saw Taverner seeing him, a mist would cloud over his eyes. Something physical was happening to either his eyes or the atmosphere whenever Haddock would appear. And that goes to show that Taverner wasn't having seizures. In fact, he remained in complete control of his faculties enough to pick up a candle and walk boldly to where Haddock was sitting in the other room in the darkness. Pierce witnessed Taverner speak. "In the name of God, why do you haunt me, Haddock? Because you have not delivered the message, and I will tear you apart should you fail to do so speedily." Then Haddock is said to have transformed into many prodigious shapes before vanishing in a white burst of light. Taverner the next day went to Lord Chichester's house and related his story with tears in his eyes. They, in turn, then related the story to their chaplain, Mr. James South, who then immediately instructed Taverner to deliver the message as soon as possible. Taverner left him alone to deliver the message, and chaplain James South went with him to make sure that he did and to comfort him. On the way, they stopped at Dr. Lewis Downes' house, the minister of Belfast, who at first questioned the tale, but upon relating it in such detail, he became convinced Taverner was telling the truth. At that point, the only concern was whether the message to be delivered to Eleanor was of God or of the devil. Whose authority was Taverner to deliver it by? The minister, Downes, doubted if this was of God, but after much thought, he finally became convinced it was in the right to deliver the message because the outcome was a just one, to right the wrong of James Haddock's son being outed of his family inheritance. Surely this must be a worthy endeavor. And so the three of them went forthwith to Eleanor's house, and Taverner, with Dr. Lewis Downes and Mr. South standing right behind him, finally delivered the message to Eleanor. Eleanor, needless to say, was speechless, but her husband, Mr. Davis, was not amused and very concerned that anyone should have even known of his deception. But with Eleanor informed, Taverner departed, and he felt a great weight lift off of him. But his duty wasn't quite over just yet. A few nights went by, and Haddock appeared again to Taverner, more pleasantly this time, and asked if he had delivered the message. "Yes, fully," Taverner replied. Haddock responded kindly enough this time, but that he needed to now relate the same message to the executors of his will to finish the business. Taverner felt this an easy enough task after all he had been through previously, and he only asked Haddock if Jacob Davis, Eleanor's husband, would attempt to stop him or even kill him for pursuing this course. Haddock paused, as if thinking the matter over, then finally replied that he would not let Jacob Davis hurt him by way of violence, if necessary. Then Haddock vanished. Taverner was able to relay the message to the executor of Haddock's will without much trouble, but by this time, word had gotten around about Taverner's episodes and Haddock's apparition. Just days later, famed Bishop Jeremy Taylor, known as being the Shakespeare of the Divine, who was a cleric in the Church of England, had heard of and made his way to meet with Taverner, and he did strictly interrogate him in front of many witnesses about this ghost business. In fact, it's Taylor's clerk, Thomas Alcock, who originally wrote this story down at Taylor's request in 1662, stating that Taverner, with all persons and places mentioned in the story, I knew very well, and all wise and good men did believe it, especially the bishop, referring to Bishop Jeremy Taylor. Taylor, indeed, as well, was convinced Taverner was telling the truth and that the apparition was true and real. Taylor instructed Taverner, should Haddock appear to him again, to ask him the following questions. Are you a good or bad spirit? Where is your abode? What station do you hold? How are you regimented in the other world? And perhaps most importantly, and what is the reason that you appear for the relief of your son in so small a matter, when so many widows and orphans are oppressed in the world, being defrauded of greater matters, and none from thence of their relations appeared as you do to right them? And not a day later, Taverner found himself in company with many others, as he was becoming quite popular with this story. Late that night, Taverner noticed that Haddock was in the other room, standing in the doorway. A maid, oblivious to Haddock's apparition, walked through the door, and Taverner noted that Haddock, rather than let the maid walk right through him because she didn't see him, Haddock took a step aside and let the maid pass by. What is the psychology and physics of a ghost? I don't know, but I just found that little tidbit interesting, that Haddock had the need to step aside so a corporeal being could walk by. It's very interesting. Anyway, Haddock asked Taverner, have you sent a message to the executor? I have. Then Taverner began to ask Haddock the questions, to which Haddock blankly stared for a few moments. Then, ignoring the questions altogether, Haddock informed Taverner that he would trouble him no more, but the executor, if he did not see the boy, his son, John, righted. Haddock said nothing more, turned, and walked away over a wall. Not through the wall, up and over it. As if gravity was no thing, but tangible enough for a ghost to stick to it and walk on it? Very strange. Needless to say, this also left Taverner shocked, but also greatly relieved that this ordeal at least appeared to be over. Jacob Davis, though, could not be more upset. He thought his son was on the lease without issue, and he was now hearing all about this phantom who was trying to call him out for his deception. He wasn't having it and would not concede the matter. Davis was under mounting pressure to make the situation right, but he refused to concede to a damned ghost story. And unfortunately, Taverner hadn't actually seen the last of Haddock. Over the next few years, Haddock would visit with Taverner every so often, trying to figure out a way to ensure John would get his inheritance. And Taverner made several attempts to meet with Davis himself, but Mr. Davis wanted nothing of him. Haddock finally asked Taverner to take the matter to court. What good would that do? I have no witnesses, Taverner said dejectedly. Never mind that, replied Haddock. I will be present and appear when called upon. To which Taverner then approached Davis, being more bold, and said he would take him to court, and that this was the last opportunity to right what they both knew was this wrong Davis had done. Davis refused and mocked him, urging him to take the matter to court, where he was sure he'd finally be rid of Taverner's incessant delusions. A court proceeding was issued. The opposing counsel browbeated and upbraided Taverner relentlessly for inventing the malicious story against Davis, and ended his defense by tauntingly asking Taverner to call his witness. The usher of the court, with a skeptical sneer, called upon James Haddock 3 times. James Haddock, James Haddock, James Haddock. And upon the 3rd recitation of his name, thunder shook the courthouse to its foundation, and to the astonishment of all in attendance, a white hand appeared near the witness table, and a booming voice said, "Is this enough?" The shocked jury immediately exclaimed their verdict in favor of young John Haddock. Davis, in utter horror, slunk away from the excited courthouse and jumped on his horse and rode away, whereupon the horse bucked hard, hurling Davis through the air and landing on his head, breaking his neck. Haddock appeared one final time to Taverner and thanked him for all he had done, whereupon Taverner meekly asked, "Now, Haddock, let me ask you this one question. Are you happy in your present state?" Haddock's grateful demeanor slowly changed to one of anger. "If you were not the man you are, I would tear you to pieces for daring to ask such a question." Then Haddock vanished in a flash of fire, never to haunt Taverner again. Although Haddock never visited Taverner again, it appears that Haddock continued to watch out for his son over the years. Famed writer Daniel Defoe reported that 5 years after the legal case in which Haddock's ghost had appeared before the court, another attempt was made to take away the lease of John Haddock. A certain Costelet, who was the child's trustee, threatened Taverner, for legally Taverner should not have known anything about the lease in the first place, and he threatened to take the matter and Taverner to court once again. Costelet, after making the matter public in a local bar and being drunk in the town of Hillhall, near Lisburn, mounted his horse to go home, and the horse bucked. Just like Mr. Davis, Costelet was hurled through the air, landing on his head. He didn't break his neck, but he never spoke again. John Haddock enjoyed the estate peaceably ever after. James Haddock was buried in the graveyard of St. Patrick's Church in Drumbeg. His wife Eleanor died 33 years after her first husband and was buried in the same grave with her name added to the headstone. A headstone, by the way, which refuses to stand upright. It originally was upright, then at some point fell over and has on numerous occasions to this day been righted, only to fall flat every single time. Make sure to like and subscribe.